My name is Christian.
Stephen McVicker.
My name's Ellen.
Hello.
It gives me the ability to create beyond most people's dreams.
We are very good at what we do.
Here I am as Sybil Faulty.
I might be in the dark or forever not know what anyone is talking about.
Having autism is, you're going to be stuck in the same position forever.
You ask what autism is to me? Can you hear it?
My one wish is for people like me to be, taken seriously.
I also wish that people would stop saying the stereotypes of autism.
We need to celebrate. We need to celebrate how diverse we are as a community.
Relevance between concepts is represented by a combination of similarity and dissimilarity in frequency.
Autism is about what you can do, not what you can't do.
If everyone was exactly the same, well, life would be boring.
Happy, happy, happy.
If you meet one person on the autism spectrum, you only meet one person with autism.
I'm a human being. I'm the same as you.
So good morning, we're still morning. I'm Fiona Sharkey, the CEO of Amaze, and that was Spectrospective. And before we get started with this session, I'd like to pay my respect to the traditional owners on the land in which we're meeting, and pay my respect to the elders past and present and any Aboriginal people here today. So Spectrospective was a project we launched 2 weeks ago, which was to celebrate World Autism Awareness Day. And the aim of it really was to teach and show the broader community about the diversity of autism, but most importantly, what people with a lived experience would say about it and what they'd like the world to know about it. So I just showed you the trailer, but it's a full 15-minute film which has now been seen in 2 weeks by over 10,200 people and been shown at 40 events throughout Victoria and across the country, including the Department of Defence in New South Wales. So we are trying to get the word out there. So enough about us and Spectrospective, but it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Peter Gerhardt today. My bigger pleasure was having coffee with him for the last hour, and I'm very lucky, I guess, as the presenter to be able to corner him and do that. But I found that we were pretty like-minded in that we want to create a world that is more supportive of people living on the autism spectrum. And through that movie of Spectrospective, and obviously the 30 years of work that Peter has done with adults and adolescents, we know that it's pretty tough out there for that community. So we, at Amaze, what we wanted to do, and talking to Peter about that, is really we want to know what are the ramps and rails for people on the autism spectrum. What is the ramps and rails, or the work that the broader community needs to do to actually build their skills in supporting people on the autism spectrum. So Peter and I share that aim, but also what he does is obviously the wonderful work working with that constituency, and he tells me that he is working with clients from aged 12 to 70, and in our film we had people from 2 to 67. So there is this importance about how we assist people right across the life course. So Peter is very impressive, I can probably just tell you that. There was a string of things that I could read, but he has had 30 years of experience working with adolescents and adult learners in education, employment, residential and community-based settings, all within a behaviour analysis framework. I think there is about 10 bullet points of all the bodies, boards, councils and things that he is involved with, which are very impressive, as I say. But I asked him, what drives you? What is it about the work you do that really drives you? And he said, I'm driven to help promote lives of competence, dignity and quality. And it is my very great pleasure to welcome Peter.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's still morning, right? Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's a distinct honor and privilege to be here. I would like to thank all of those involved, by the way, with having me over here for their understanding of my executive functioning deficits and my inability to often respond to emails. So I just wanted to publicly thank everybody for that. Now that you know I own a sport coat, I'm taking it off. Thank you. I really only wear it so my mother knows I have a real job. I've been working with adolescents and adults with autism spectrum disorders for 35 years. When I started in the field, we didn't have a spectrum. Well, we did. We had autism and Temple Grandin. Like, that was the spectrum back when I started. And I started by accident. I was trying to take a class as an undergraduate student where I'd work one day a week at an on-campus nursery school for typical kids, and at the end of the semester, you write a paper about your experience, you mention Piaget a couple times, and you get an A. Like, that was the gig. But every other junior psychology major signed up for the course, so I got closed out and put in a course called Fieldwork Psychology Developmental Disabilities, and I had to work with kids with autism. Well, I will tell you, I got placed in the adolescent classroom, thankfully, because if I got placed with the little kids, I would have done a semester and left. Little kids bore me to tears. They also scare me a little bit, but that's besides the point. I think I initially got fascinated with autism. Autism is kind of fascinating. But then I quickly became more fascinated with what people with autism could do. And I will tell you, back in 1980, it was a great field for a young professional like me to get praised. No matter what we did with kids with autism, people were like, good job. Like, we're taking them out to lunch today. Good job. We're teaching them to make lunch today. Good job. The problem is I go to places today and I see them doing the same thing we did 35 years ago, where our field has changed dramatically in the past 30 years in terms of early intervention. We know so much more. In terms of social skill development with little kids, and we know all of this, but when it comes to what does it mean to help develop a life, our knowledge base is pretty lacking. So I do this. I start almost every talk. I started to do this in the States, after the first presidential election where Barack Obama was elected president. After all the debates, they would have a bunch of political talking head pundits say, well, he said this and this was true. He said this and this was partly true. He said this. So today, on a scale of 0 being utter nonsense and 6 being absolute fact, I'm about a 4.5. And that's because we don't have a whole lot of research into adolescents and adults. Now, I'm hopeful I can come back in 10 years and still be at a 4.5, but a different 4.5. I don't think you ever get to be at a 6, so that's my goal. I'll try and distinguish between what is actual evidence-based and what we do in practice, but a couple quick points before we delve into this. independent of how evidence-based your interventions are, teaching the wrong skills well is no better than teaching the right skills poorly. I go to schools and I see adolescents working on things, and I sit there and I go, is there any reason on God's green earth for you to know this? We teach kids coin identification, right? Coin identification. We think, oh, that's so important, coin identification. You know what? When I leave Australia, somebody's getting the biggest tip of their lifetime. I don't have time to go through all this and go, oh, no, wait a minute. This is like, actually, it's going to go to UNICEF, because UNICEF has the bags on the, I can get along very well without doing it. There is no woman somewhere at a bar saying, I would go home with that guy, but he doesn't know how to identify coins. Personally, I think that is the reason for any functional skill in the world, but that's my own. My second point is, you know what, we should be successful in our classrooms. We should be. We control every variable. We control when the day starts, when it stops, if the lights are on, if the lights are off, who works with this kid, how long they work with the kid, what his goals are, what his reinforcement schedule. We should be incredibly successful, but the real test of all of our work should be what happens outside the classroom. And one of my crusades is to get us to stop blaming the kid that it didn't generalize, or blaming the parents that it didn't generalize. That's part of our job. And I think the real standard of our efficacy as behavior analysts is how well that kid does when we're not there. If he only does well when we're there, it's sort of half a victory, right? So we need to set our sights a bit bigger. The third thing is adulthood's really hard. Adulthood is tough. You guys are probably tired at the end of the day, aren't you? I know I am. Adulthood is complicated. There's an awful lot of skills we need to teach. So how do we figure out what skills to teach, in what way, for which individuals, in which environment, if we're actually going to be effective? Well, anyway, knowing that, this is how this talk actually developed over the past couple years. Here's part one, the quintessential male dilemma. After I urinate in the toilet, do I put the seat down or do I leave it up? Now, I have two older sisters. So I learned this skill at a very early age in my life. Probably about the age of 3, I learned this skill. I will also point out that this skill was developed and maintained in my repertoire solely by punishment procedures. No woman ever reinforced me for putting the toilet seat down. Just a hint, ladies, but my wife, my ex-wife, and I were still very good friends. I always feel I have to say that. About 7 years ago, we separated. So I was living as a bachelor, and my second year as living as a bachelor, I realized I stopped putting the toilet seat down at home. And I was fascinated with that. And I was fascinated with that because I'm a pretty socially fluent guy. And if such an important skill falls out of my repertoire once the contingencies are removed, how do I expect all these other skills to stay in the repertoire of my kids, my students, once these contingencies are removed? And I started to think, how do I do this now? Well, the second part was, having worked with a whole lot of adults by this point in my life, probably 300 adults, I get really tired of saying, how come nobody taught you this? I know a whole lot of adults who can identify the poison sign but will still drink the poison. I know a whole lot of adults who can identify exit but don't know that's how you leave the building. I know a lot of kids with a lot of language who, after they have a meltdown, can tell you everything they were supposed to do to avoid having a meltdown, but were never taught to do it under the circumstances when they would have a meltdown. So it just never became part of their repertoire. So we have a whole lot of skills that we just don't teach. And then lastly was my quasi-experiment. I worked at a school in New York City for a couple of years, the McCartan School. I had 2 classes, 5 adolescents, classic autism. I don't use the terms high functioning, low functioning. I know it's like if you call somebody high functioning, then you're saying somebody else has lesser skills. And if you call them low functioning, then you're not really looking at their. I just use it because I don't use it because it's inaccurate. All it refers to is language. If someone has language, we say they're high functioning. And when I know some really low functioning, high verbal learners. So it's just so classic autism are these kids who are more challenged by their autism. As my friend Joanne Gerhardt said, these are these kids who are really dedicated to their autism. They're not giving it up for anybody. And then this other group I usually refer to as Asperger type, even though I know in the States we cured everybody with Asperger syndrome with DSM-5. So these are kids with classic autism, 2 classrooms, 10 kids, 5 kids in each class, one-on-one instruction. I told the staff I was going to come into the classroom, put a timer down. When the timer went off, the teachers were supposed to walk away from all their students, and then we collected data on what the students did. What do you think the students did when we walked away from them? Nothing. They did nothing. Now, someone at one presentation said, well, typical kids would do that too. No, they wouldn't. Typical kids would do everything else but what they were supposed to do, but they would do something. So what did that mean? Well, it told me that everything we were doing was teacher-directed, everything. It also told me that, at least in part, students were reinforced via negative reinforcement, not positive. Because once the task ended, they stopped. So it was the end of the task they were working for, not any reinforcer inherent with completing the task, right? And the third thing was none of the skills we were teaching were viewed as being of any value to our students. And I said, something is wrong here. At the same time, I was reading a book by Jane McGonigal called Reality is Broken. And it's about massive multiplayer online games, World of Warcraft. I know that there's some of you here that play these. I don't. She reported data that the average American spends 142 hours a year playing these worldwide, 3.2 billion hours. To do what? To level up as a warrior knight 4? And I couldn't figure out what the reinforcement schedule was for doing this and why we would divert all our time. And so I went into game theory, and that games are defined by a goal. We have a goal in behavior analysis, right? We have a goal in education, right? By rules. Games are defined by rules. Well, we have rules in education and behavior analysis. A feedback system. We have a feedback system in behavior analysis and education. But a game is defined by voluntary participation. And this we don't have, right? That we don't have. Well, the problem, though, let's go to Beowulf and Risley and the 7 dimensions of ABA. Well, it's applied, deals with problems of social importance, so that's a goal. Behavioral, deals with measurable behavior, those are rules. Analytic is a system of feedback. Technological, well, we have more rules. Conceptual systems, well, it's a goal, feedback, and rules. Effective, that's feedback. But we have generality, designed from the outset to operate in new environments and continue after formal treatment has ended. Perhaps this is where voluntary participation fits in. Perhaps this is where I need to focus to have my students and my adults more engaged in what we're trying to teach them. So maybe we need to consider this if we're really going to look at skills that are once acquired, generalize and maintain across time and environments. But there's another problem. And that's Sharkey in 2012. He did a comprehensive literature review, 2000 and 2010, all the studies published on adults ages 18 and up, and he concluded that the evidence base about services for adults is underdeveloped and can be considered a field of inquiry that is relatively uninformed. Impressive, huh? That's the adult service world. That presents us with a challenge. So how do we deal with it? How do we then bring it to this thing that's called quality of life? That's what you guys want, right? You guys want a positive quality of life. That's what you want. Well, this is the most common definition, particularly in the disability field. Quality of life is a temporal condition of personal satisfaction, so it's time-bound, and it's how you view your life. With such core life conditions as physical well-being, are you physically healthy? Emotional well-being, how is your mental health? Interpersonal relations, do you have friends? By the way, one of my friends on the spectrum, Donna Vickers, who I'll talk a little bit about later, said, all you need in your life is one good typical friend. And when I asked her, how come just one? She said, because two of you are too hard to understand. I said, I understand that. Social inclusion, personal growth, material well-being, self-determination, and individual rights. How good are all of you on these? This is tough. So now how do we start to program for these? Well, in the intellectual disabilities field, they've talked about it for over 30 years. But in the ASD field, probably only about the past decade have we really talked about quality of life, if that. Now, that's in part because we're still a relatively young field, but I do think moving forward, improving the quality of people's lives has been one of the implicit goals of service provision in recent decades and remains so. But now we need to move from just sort of talking about it to doing it. And how do we now implement this system that actually changes people's lives for the better? Before we go into that, I just want to talk about, I said we're a young field. 1943, right? Leo Kanner, right? Disturbances of affective contact, published in a journal called Nervous Child. I just love that in 1943 there was a journal called Nervous Child, because I assume Antsy Little Bugger was already taken, so they had to choose that. Hans Asperger in 44, but basically the literature coming out of Nazi Germany at the time, wasn't really that highly read until Uta Frith came along and translated it. Then we had this nut job basically saying that moms caused it, right? You moms are so crazy that you caused autism. And you know what the entire world said? Makes sense. That's basically what they did. Now, if you want any more evidence of why we need to understand science as important to autism intervention, just say two words, brutal Benelheim. Okay? Because it's easy to get distracted by things that you think make sense when they don't make sense. So science is critical here. But other people thought differently, and then we had behavior analysis coming into the picture. Then we had the 87 Lovas. See, that's two presentations with a picture of Lovas in it. Okay? But now, how do we translate all this into adults? Well, you guys know this. This is the three-term contingency, right? This is science. So we have the antecedent. By the way, I violate US copyright law about 1,000 times in this presentation. Thankfully, I'm in Australia, so nobody can sue me. So somebody's yelling in the environment, that's the antecedent. Our student starts crying, that's the behavior. The consequence is that it's either positive reinforcement, it's okay, honey, calm down, Or negative reinforcement is that the crying causes the screaming to stop. Are you guys that simple in how you behave in the community? No, you're not. And the reason is that you have about 5,000 of these three-term contingencies running at any given time. And they all compete with one another for superiority based upon any number of factors. So when working with adolescents, the three-term contingency falls out more like this. I say, let's go to work, which is our antecedent directive. But then we have all of these intervening variables. At the height of the AIDS crisis in the 80s, one of their phrases was, if you sleep with someone, you sleep with everyone they ever slept with. And what I do, if I work with an adult with autism, I work with everyone they ever worked with. Good, bad, or indifferent. I have to deal with that. So I have to deal with learning history, adolescence and its impact, communication challenges, social challenges, mental health challenges, physical health challenges, medication side effects, environmental stressors, curriculum considerations, boredom. I think boredom is a huge factor in the lives of people on the spectrum. I go into classrooms sometimes and I say, you know what? I would hit you too. That would be it. You know? You're the behavior problem here, not him. Fix your behavior first. Sexuality, sleep issues, aging in and of itself, and then we get aggression, and then we get the very confused professional as the consequence. Its consequence is some unknown desire met, and we have a very confused BCBA. Because as you get older, you get more complicated. You get more complex, and we have this bizarre belief that we think that people with autism sort of stay very simple. So the challenge moving ahead really is not to look for simple solutions to complex problems, but at the same time not forgetting that sometimes simple solutions work best. I'm very well known for going in and they say, every time we do math, he's aggressive. I say, stop doing math. There's absolutely no, he's been on addition for 4 years. Do you think you have the magic cure now to actually be able to change that in his life? Stop doing math. I would like to point out that there are these incorrect perceptions of apply. You guys don't hold these. You know, you're the chosen people. You know, but out in the community at large, you know, it is perceived as sort of synonymous just with DTI or maybe even functional behavior assessment, but it's a really large field. I will also point out that it's not really this rigid, unyielding, and unalterable set of instructions. I think good behavior analysts are very zen. I think they live in the moment. I think they understand changing criteria and changing contingencies in that moment and are able to respond according to an evidence-based system of knowledge that they have acquired over the years. The example I use is you're grocery shopping with an individual who has a history of aggression. He starts to get upset. Do you keep grocery shopping because we're doing an escape extinction procedure so we want to work through his aggression? Do you pick up one more thing and then go pay for it so you can get out of the supermarket? Or do you leave everything where it is and run like hell to get out of the supermarket? And the answer is, it could be any one of those, depending on the circumstances, if you're a good behavior analyst. That's how these things work. There's this perception that we really don't think about the person, that we're robotic, right? In a conversation with Gina Green, she said, when done correctly, there's not a field of intervention that's more person-centered than applied behavior analysis. I need to know this person inside and out before I can work with them. Otherwise, everything I'm going to do isn't going to work. This is one of my own little personal crusades. In ABA-based intervention, we often think that the sign of the devil, 666, is a verbal prompt. You know, that you can't verbal prompt. Verbal prompts are bad. Verbal prompts are heresy. I just like to point out that the world outside your classroom, outside your programs, functions on verbal prompts. And if you don't believe me, the next time you're at the store and someone just stops in front of you in the aisle, gesturally prompt them to move and see what happens. The problem with verbal prompts is that I think, my opinion, that they are the most susceptible to abuse. because they're so low in response effort that we sit there and go, John, do this. John, do this. John, like all of a sudden, because we don't have to do, where if they're used correctly, they're not horrible. And guess what? Prompts are everywhere. I've developed this weird habit of taking pictures in bathrooms, which in some ways is going to get me killed, I think. But, and I would really bet that almost every one of these signs is put up by a woman, you know? Because we sort of don't care, that's all. If you have not read this article, please read this article. Published in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis in 1990, Balancing the Right to Habilitation with the Right to Personal Liberties, the Rights of People with Developmental Disabilities to Eat Too Many Donuts and Take a Nap. A seminal article in my development as a professional, so please do yourself a favor. In the final analysis, adult skills are really difficult to teach and acquire. So, no, sorry, if you can't keep up, forget it. No. I could if this was a Mac. Yeah, go ahead. And I can use this as an example, by the way, because I often, just recently, I've gotten tired of talking about autism deficits. I really don't care about deficits anymore. I care about strengths. And the reason being is that all of us, all of you here, there are more things you can't do than that you can do. But you don't spend your entire day talking about everything you can't do. But that's what we do in autism. We say, he can't do that, he can't do that, that's too far, that's too difficult, that's too challenging, that's this. As opposed to saying, why can't he? Let's give him a chance and see if he can. May I go on now? So what's a behavior analyst to do? In the States, we call it curb cuts, ramps and rails. All these accommodations that we've developed for people who have physical disabilities, right? They're everywhere. We have handicapped parking spaces, and which is grammatically incorrect because it means the parking stall is handicapped, which is just stupid. But we have all this sort of stuff that's out there that wasn't that. So now, what is a curb cut for someone with a neurological challenge? That's our next big step. This is the architectural definition. A small ramp built into the curb of a sidewalk to ease the passage to the street, especially for bicyclists, pedestrians with baby carriages, and the physically disabled people. I love that people with physical disabilities were last. Bicyclists and people with baby carriages, that was ranked up higher. So what would we do? Well, these are what I think we need to look at. And not to get too new age on everybody, although I did say good behavior analysts live in the moment and are very zen, I think this concept of resilience is something that we need to reinvestigate in ASD. And as a behavior analyst, it really is just resistance to extinction. That's all. I see a whole group of adults who try something, it doesn't work, and then they stop. They don't try again. They don't make a second attempt. We actually discourage them from making second attempts because we don't want them to do it incorrectly because we think they're practicing the wrong way. I will tell you, it's really hard to learn new skills if you don't occasionally practice it the wrong way and then not get to do it the right way. A friend of mine, Karen, was supposed to meet me at a program. Should have taken her 2 hours to drive there. She got so lost, it took her 5 hours to get there. She didn't have GPS. She called into the program. She was so lost, they couldn't even tell her where she was to get there. But finally, she gets there. And all of us are like, oh, thank God you got here. So we were a little worried about you, but we figured you'd get here eventually. We're just glad you got here. But then we decided if she was an adult on the spectrum who was driving, after an hour of being late, somebody probably would have called the cops. And then when they finally got there, somebody probably would have said, you know what, I don't think you can drive long distances anymore. Like apparently you can't do that. So what we would do is consecrate them for making the mistake in the first place, as opposed to praising them, reinforcing them for figuring it out. And of of those two, what's the more important skill? Is figuring it out. I don't know about you guys, but I don't make it through a day without making a mistake. So unless I have skills to figure things out, I can't succeed. In behavior analysis, we've long accepted this phenomenon of learned helplessness, which I think is personally somewhat endemic in adults with more classic autism. But we've yet to sort of look at what Seligman now calls learned optimism, this ability to try again. Now, folks with autism have great perseverance. We just call it perseverative in ASD. So they do it on things they want to do it, but on other things, they don't. Just like when I talk to families about working, and they say, oh, he can't be on task for more than 5 minutes. And I say, how long can he watch a video? And they say, oh, 4 hours. I say, well, good. Then it's actually a problem in transferring a skill deficit. No, it's not a skill deficit, it's a display deficit. Because he can do something for 4 hours if he's interested. That's what we need to look at. Number two, I think we've missed the boat on teaching kids how to make choices. Across the spectrum, we've sort of abandoned this. We teach kids simple either-or choices across the spectrum. When this is, if I went up to you and I said, do you want an apple? First thing you would do is look at the apple and decide if you want that apple. But maybe you'd say, I want an apple, but I want a yellow delicious. No, I want a Macintosh. No, I want a red delicious. No, I want a Granny Smith. Okay, I want a Granny Smith. Then I'm going to go cut it up and have it with cheese. No, I just want to cut, no, I want the whole, no, I want applesauce is what I want. But we got to the kid with autism, do you want an apple? He takes the apple, he goes to walk away, and 9 times out of 10 people say, sit down and eat your apple. As opposed to saying, well, what's his next choice? What's his next decision? Where is he going with this? It's really important to be able to make decisions if you're going to be social. Because social skills, by the way, are not linear. Social skills are not I say A, you say B, I say D, you say E, I say F. Social skills are logarithmic. They're decision-making skills. It's I say A, you can say B, C, D, E, F, or G. You say G, I can see apple, lemon, grapefruit, pear, banana, ugly fruit. I say ugly fruit, you can do alpha, beta. But in applied behavior analysis, we tend to teach linear, right? Which is not how social skills work. They're decision trees. Number 3, I think we need to train the typicals. This is my friend Donna. Donna she was part of a support group that we ran, and she was going to a new gynecologist. You have those in Australia, right, gynecologists? Just checking. And we told her that she should disclose to her gynecologist. The reason being, not only is Donna on the spectrum, but she's also just quirky anyway. So we said, you need to let this person know. So she went and said, by the way, you should know I have Asperger syndrome. And her male gynecologist said, no, you don't. She said, yes, I do. He said, no, you don't. She said, yeah, I do. He said, I'm sorry, but you don't. She said, yes, I do, you stupid SOB, MF, cursed him out like a sailor, and left. She came to group. We talked about it. We did some role play about how she could have handled it better. In the 3rd role play, she turned to me and said, you know what, if you're typicals of all the skills, why don't you adapt for a while, damn it? Why is it always my fault? And she further went on to say, if I was a wheelchair user, do you think you would say, I'd love to hire you, but you have to learn to walk first? Why do you do this to me? I said, that's a really good point. So with Donna's permission, and Donna on the phone, we called. The doctor said, well, the reason, if she was on the spectrum, she wouldn't be aware enough to actually be able to tell me that she had Asperger syndrome. So I said, Donna, I don't care what he knows about your lady parts, just don't go back to him. That's it. Number 4, teach the right skills in the right context. Behavioral maxim number 1, I learned back in 1980, was teach where the behavior is most likely to be displayed. Right? We know generalization is a problem, yet we continue to teach skills out of context. And then this what you do every day matters more than what you do once in a while. You know, taking algebra, right? You learn to factor binomial equations, right? People learn to factor binomial equations. That's great. You know the next time most adults factor binomial equations? When their kid takes algebra. That's it. Now, algebra is great. It teaches learning skills and thinking skills, but these are the skills that are actually much more important. And all of these skills fall under this heading of adaptive behavior. Adaptive behavior is everything you do that's not academic. This, by the way, is Bill Eward's definition. So if you, like for some behavior analytics street cred, this is, you know, his. This, just so you know, is some of the work that we're doing. This is a scale that we've developed to sort of look at, is this really the right skill to teach for this kid? But one of the things I want to point out is that when we do this, it usually tends that the most important skills are those skills that are the riskiest to teach. So I do think as we move forward, we all need to have some sort of discussion about risk and what is acceptable risk. And I can't reduce risk to zero for anybody, but I think we need to start looking at what does that really mean. You getting all this? Because I know you're very fast learners. So we need to pay greater attention to matching law. And matching law basically is that we all distribute our responses in direct proportion to the reinforcement inherent upon those responses. So what we're looking at now, are there high-value skills that are low effort? And if they are, we can teach those, and they're probably going to maintain and generalize pretty easily. Are there high-value skills that are high effort? Well, if there are, then they're probably going to take us a while to teach, but once we've taught them, they're there. Low value, low effort, these are all those hygiene skills. And hygiene, by the way, is only a disability term. You never turn to your spouse and say, so how's your hygiene today? It's only a disability term. But these are difficult because they're all socially reinforced skills. And then the ones that we try and stay away from are these low value, high effort skills. These are those skills that if we do teach them, he's just never going to do them again anyway. So this is what we're working on now. When we have interventions that are evidence-based, we sort of need to use them. In the area of social skills, we have a whole bunch of, as was discussed earlier this morning. I'm going to skip through these. I think the seventh thing is that we have to accept that life's not perfect. A recent study found that 15% of men and 7% of women didn't wash their hands at a public restroom. When they did wash their hands, only 50% of men used soap compared with 78% of women. Further, only 5% of people wash their hands well enough to remove germs. I've seen kids with hand washing goals in their IEP for 6, 7, 8 years. In a recent study on casual sex during spring break, researchers found that 15% of men and 13% of women had sex with someone they just met. Further, by the time they left college, 77% of women and 83% of men did. You know what that means? That's the normative standard. So if we're really concerned about normative appropriate behavior, that's what you should be teaching your kids to do. A recent study found that less than 20% of Americans bounce their checkbooks, yet I see people being taught to bounce their checkbooks all the time. The fact is mistakes happen all the time. The trick is to minimize dangerous mistakes while allowing non-dangerous. Some closing thoughts. Very quickly, this is a study that we did 2009 on happiness. This is an MP4 watch. It's just like a video iPod, but it costs $49. That's the difference. Young man, classic autism, at the time of study, 20 years old, functionally nonverbal, although he could man for certain things. History of aggression. We wanted him to exercise at the local gym independently and enjoy it. We wanted it to be a high effort, high value task. What we did was we videotaped him doing the different exercises, edited it down to make it look like he was doing them all continuously. Using his actual iPod on shuffle mode, we determined which songs were actually his high-value songs, his most highly preferred songs. If he stayed on a song a long time, it was high value. If he skipped to the next song, it was low value. We then paired his most preferred songs with his least preferred exercises. At the time of the study, the 1980 Tony Basil, "Oh Mickey, You're So Fine, You're So Fine" was his favorite song. Least favorite exercise was the Stairmaster. I'm just going to jump ahead. Here are the data. Because we're behavior analysts, we are apparently legally obligated to first do a Velcro and laminated picture schedule to teach them how to do this. So that's that first half. But then we turn the watch on and look what happens. Right? But those aren't the important data. These are. Because we also behaviorally defined affect. And when he had the laminated picture schedule, he's neutral. When we turn the music on, look where he goes. He's not only independent, but he's laughing, and he's smiling, and he's singing. And that's our goal. If we want to develop lives of competence, dignity, and quality, our goal are to look at teaching skills like this, that are skills that are going to last a lifetime. So, don't dream it, be it, and most importantly, a failure is not always a mistake. It may simply be the best one can do under the circumstances. The real mistake is to stop trying. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very, very much, Peter. Now we've got 5 minutes for some questions. Yep. Up the back there.
Could you elaborate more on some of your behavioural analysis in the workplace and teaching these kids work-related skills?
Behavior analysis in the workplace, that was the question. In the workplace, we do a couple of things. One is we really look at something called job match, which is why the person would want to do this job in the first place. And it's not just the task itself, it's the environment. There's the music on in the background, is he standing or sitting, it's all these sort of things. But we also target skills that we want to change in his coworkers. That's a big part of what we do. We get everybody to buy into this as an employment project, not just, we're just going to work with this kid. Because for all of us, employment is supposed to be part of a social environment. You know, it's where you make your primary contacts. It's where you do. So we build skills not only in the guys on the spectrum, but also in their coworkers. Now we have to do that somewhat surreptitiously. Like we don't give out tokens, they don't get a penny board, you know. But we do identify what we want them to do and praise them for doing it. The most recent, it's really a silly example, but we got a very challenged young man working. And we told all his coworkers, listen, please say hi to him, because we want him to be part of the social fabric here, but he's only going to say hi back about 1 out of 3 times. Now, if we don't tell them that, they're going to say hi once, he won't reply, and then that's it. Like, we've effectively extinguished that. But we said, no, like he wants to say hi, sometimes it's hard for him to make the words, so please do it. I came back about a month later, and people are going out of their way to say hi to this guy, to talk to this guy. And I said to the job coach, like, what happened? Like, how did this? And he said, John's become a status symbol. And I said, what do you mean? Like, people say, John said hi to me today. Did he say hi to you? No, he doesn't really like But I gave them the ability to understand him, so that worked that way. I think what we need to do is look at our units of behavior change as much bigger units. And we can do this, but we have to actually think in bolder terms if we're doing it, particularly in the workplace. That's how I see it, at least.
Thanks again to Peter.